So next up is my colleague and fellow Mountmaker here at the MFA, Kimberley McParland. Her presentation is entitled Mount Storage, Mo Mounts, Mo Problems. Kim is the exhibitions preparator here at the Museum of Fine Arts. While Kim earned her BFA degree, she managed a small ceramics studio and worked as an assistant conservator in private practice. Kim began at the MFA as an assistant in the Objects Conservation Lab and later transitioned into mount making. Kim enjoys the opportunity mount making provides to work creatively with her hands while still allowing for the intimate experience working with art and artifacts. Kim?
You're tall. Welcome back from lunch, everybody, for those of you who are back. Okay, so I'm going to have a little bit of a different topic, a little less technical, but hopefully still practical. Let's see. So, Mo Mounts, Mo Problems. In the time that I've been a mount maker at the MFA Boston, our annual workload has increased exponentially. We produce hundreds of mounts every year. Each object that we put on display has its own custom-made mount, whether it's an object from our permanent collection, a loan to another institution, or an object borrowed from a lender. In fact, some objects have multiple mounts, usually because they've been displayed numerous times and in different orientations over the years. We save the majority of the mounts that we make. Saving mounts serves several purposes. Most importantly, it saves time. Secondly, it saves time. Time is always a factor for us, and if a mount already exists for an object, there's a good chance we won't need to make a new one, therefore less work for us. Additionally, we're more likely to be able to fulfill last-minute requests. Saving mounts also saves money. Time equals money, and it also saves on materials costs. Lastly, rehousing mounts is a more sustainable and environmentally friendly museum practice. There are some problems with saving mounts, like keeping track of them, trying to keep them organized, and finding a place and a way to store them. For the last few years, I've taken on this challenge for the MFA Boston. The project continues to evolve and is a slow work in progress since I'm only able to work on it on my downtime. So problem number one, I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about how we identify and track our mounts. Many of you are probably familiar with TMS, the Museum System Database. We use TMS to identify objects, track their locations, and record and share information about our collection. Each object has an individual loan or accession number and a record in the database. Many of the objects also have ANC records associated with them. ANC is short for ancillary. ANCs are basically object accessories, which for our purposes are mounts for exhibition and display. We create an ANC record for each mount. This ANC record is then linked with the object it belongs to in the system. It creates a parent-child relationship in which the object is the parent and the ANC is the child. This allows anyone to search for an object and see if it has a mount because the ANC record will pop up as something related to the object. So we're searching for this object here, and up in this group information you see, oh, yay, it has a mount. Then you would click on the Related tab up here, you select Objects, and it brings you directly to the record for the ANC. It also gives you information about what kind of a mount it is and where it's located, and if you're lucky, it has a nice little picture of the actual mount itself. The ANC record, oh, nope, sorry. Where am I? Oh, the reverse is also true. So if you have a mount that you don't know what it belongs to, you can search for the ANC record, and it will bring up the object that it belongs to. The physical storage of our mounts is a more interesting story. For many years, mounts were typically stored with the objects that they belonged to. In addition to occupying valuable object storage space, this practice proved problematic because mounts would get lost, locations were not updated, and sometimes mounts got damaged. It also requires us to go all over the building looking for them, and we couldn't even get into all of the storage areas. So we decided to create a mount storage to make it easier for us to locate and access the mounts when we need to, and to mitigate any potential for loss or damage. We acquired a cabinet and erected some shelving in a small attic space off the back of our old mount shop. This was the beginning of our mount storage. Then at the end of 2010, the MFA opened the New American Wing, which consists of over 50 new galleries and connector spaces. At the completion of the project, we had more than 400 mounts that were fabricated and not used for various reasons, such as object cuts and design changes. It was clear that our attic was no longer going to accommodate our storage needs, so we began to seek out precious new storage space. Adjacent to our old mount shop, there is a partially deinstalled period room that is closed to the public. Opened in 1914, this space was originally the William Morris Hunt Picture Gallery. The entrance hall to the gallery was a narrow room consisting of ornate wood paneling, a fireplace, tiled flooring, and stained glass windows from the Tudor period. So in this announcement in the paper, this is the picture gallery here, and here is this gallery space shown there. The gallery was closed to the public in 1914, but here's a couple of details of it when it was installed in the museum, although it had been closed for some time. The larger space, the picture gallery, was converted into what is called the Morse Pottery Antechamber, which housed a collection of over 400 ceramic artifacts. The collection was being kept in poor conditions, particularly because the space was not climate controlled and the storage cabinets were made of wood. In 2003, the museum decided to pack up the Morse collection and move it to a safer storage location. This left the room empty, and since it was not equipped to store art, it became a general supply and storage area for the conservation and collections management departments. As part of this conversion, the entrance hall was partially deinstalled to allow for the entryway to be expanded. The room quickly filled up with supplies and junk. However, no one was using the narrow entry hall, so we got permission to claim it for mount storage. We erected one pallet rack against the wall, and at the time, I remember us thinking, we will never fill this whole thing. But we couldn't have been more wrong. So here's a little bit of a before and after. This is obviously before the deinstallation stuff was done, and this is actually what the room looks like now. But I never expected to be giving a paper about this, so I don't have any images of the progression of the project. But you can see this one pallet rack in the middle was our original pallet rack there. So needless to say, it wasn't long before we filled all 5 shelves of the first pallet rack, so we added another, and we filled those too. We broke down old shipping crates that were going to be trashed and made even more shelving that we placed along the opposite wall. We also added a couple of cabinets, and we filled all of those spaces too. Over time, it became increasingly difficult to find mounts, even though every mount is numbered and its location is recorded in TMS. Mounts were piled on top of each other, despite our initial efforts to keep things organized. It was just too crowded. Even if you knew which shelf a mount was on, you still had to shift through layers of mounts trying to find the one that you were looking for. These images are actually of the shelves a little more thinned out, but you get the idea. Not only was this frustrating and time-consuming, it was also detrimental to the mounts, as they got tangled up and dusty and sometimes damaged. This was obviously a problem. So I decided to take it on as a side project to try to revamp our mount storage. I needed to figure out a way to make it easier to find mounts and to keep them clean and prevent the damage at the same time. I decided to use Sterilite plastic bins with lids to store the mounts in. I selected 5 different sized and shaped bins. These bins solved my problems to keep the mounts clean and organized, and also added 2 bonus features. The bins were durable and can be stacked, which increases space efficiency, and they provide a safe and easy way to move and track many mounts at once. The project was pretty overwhelming at first, so I decided to break it up and start by organizing mounts for just one curatorial department at a time. I figured the easiest mounts to rehouse would be the ones that have stems and that fit standing upright in the bins. First, I measured the interior height of all the different sizes of the bins. Then I went through the mounts and separated them into groups that would fit in each size bin and organized those groups into numerical order. I also made new mount ID tags so that they all had the same information and look. I simply include the ANC and the corresponding object number. Next, I measured the bottom interior of a bin and outfitted it with 2 inches of ethafoam to push the mounts into. We typically use ethafoam to hold mounts on shelves, so I just envisioned replicating this in a more organized fashion inside the bins. Finally, I filled the bin with mounts, placing each one into the foam in rows and in numerical order. I repeated this process with other size bins as well, separating the mounts by size, putting them in order by number, and then placing them into the foam in rows as best as possible, trying to keep the numerical order. To keep track, I assigned identification codes to each of the bins. I start with the prefix for a curatorial department and then add a number. Each curatorial department has its own color and number range of 100. For example, Art of Europe is shortened to AOE, here, is green and has numbers ranging from 300 to 399. Here are some of my actual labels, AOE 308, AOE 300. The bin ID will become its permanent home storage location in TMS. Unfortunately, some of the curatorial acronyms have changed since I started this project, but we're not going back. Then I create an object package for the bin in TMS. As you can see here is my list of object packages of all the different mount bins. It gives you how many mounts are in each bin, and then it brings up all the mounts there within that one bin. This allows me to print a report containing the mount ANCs and the corresponding object numbers, as well as to update the location of all the mounts in the bin at once. I made and printed simple lists of just the ANCs and corresponding object numbers for the outside of the bins that show what each one contains. I attached the TMS report to the top of the bin in a sleeve. This is a bit of overkill, but I do it anyway. The bin ID and the number lists are taped to two sides of the bin, one short and one long, so that if I need to reorient the bins on the shelves, the numbers will still be visible. So here's just an example of how they look, all stacked up on the shelves. And I just like this picture because of the stained glass windows. It's actually a lot darker in there. It doesn't quite look that pretty, but with flash and stuff, it looks amazing. So once I finished up the easier and more straightforward mount bins, I had to start working on more complicated ones. Many of the mounts don't fit in the bins standing up or are awkward shapes and fit in the bins but take up almost the entire thing themselves. I began tinkering with ways that I could fit more mounts by supporting them with foam and Velara to maximize my use of space while still keeping them organized and easy to find. You can't get too layered or complicated, though, because it becomes a pain to get them out, and inevitably, you're going to need the one at the bottom. Then I got even more creative. The bins are tapered, and there's a little ledge on the inside of the bins, and I thought, maybe I could use that to support a shelf. So I started making shelves. I made them out of corrugated blue board, hot gluing pieces together, crossing the corrugation for added strength, adding a layer of Velara, and then I glued on little twill handles for easy lifting. So here you see a bottom layer and the top layer. This is kind of them stacked on top of each other, and here's a side view so you can see the two there. Here's another example. This allows me to combine mounts of different shapes and sizes into the same bin, further increasing the capacity. A couple more examples. Some bins require a little more customizing, like this one. So these fan mounts here are very large, and they have stems attached to them that don't come off, so they take up a lot of space, almost the whole thing themselves. There's actually one missing from right here. I keep track of where things go by leaving myself a little note, and it also gives me an idea of where it goes back when it comes back to go to storage. So I cut holes and to allow the stems to go through, and therefore I'm still able to utilize the storage space underneath. Or this one where I had these mounts that all have the plates on the bottom that I wanted to keep together, but a few of them were a little too tall for the shelf, so I just simply cut away a portion of the shelf so that I could still use it in there. For sets of clips and plexi and epoxy-based inserts, I have made these blue board interiors to create compartments inside the bins. I bag and label everything and store them in numerical order. I've also made boxes for installation templates. Since the bins all have different dimensions, it took quite a bit of work to get the interior parts the right size, so I've also made templates for each of the components. This allows me to construct several of these at a time and in advance, which helps to streamline the rehousing process. I have templates for Ethafoam, Velara, and all the blue board components. I also thought it would be worth mentioning that the good portion of the materials and supplies that I use are scraps or recycled from other museum projects. So the biggest cost for this project is the bins themselves. So what's next? I hope to reorganize the bins and try to utilize the space on the racks a little better. I'm currently using most of the smaller wooden shelves we made as a combination space for mounts that don't fit into bins and as a staging area for mounts that need housing. This storage space is constantly being eyed by others in the museum. They want to convert it into collaboration space or any number of things, but my saving grace has always been the lack of accessibility because of the stairs in the entry and the lack of climate. It's way too costly to acclimatize and almost impossible to satisfy ADA requirements, so I've been able to keep it from their clutches so far. Then, there are the mannequins. Originally, the large adjoining room, aka the picture gallery, you can see some of the lovely cornice here in that picture, was shared by all of Conservation, Collections Management, and Scientific Research departments. The back part of the room was allotted to textiles conservation, but over the years, they have slowly annexed the vast majority of space with a gradual influx of dismembered bodies. I am awaiting the impending mannequin invasion. Thank you.
The Army will eventually take over that entire room, I'm just saying.
She works in textiles, so.
Those are my mannequins.
So I should also mention, because we're colleagues, that Kim is doing all this work on top of doing all our regular mount work and installation and deinstallation, so I sometimes don't even know myself how she gets it all done.
I think that that's amazing. As our company is not attached to an institution, so we always wonder what happens to our mounts when we leave them. But the question that I had is, with all the organization that you're doing, and because so much time passes, are you also keeping mount notes for installation and deinstallation as well? And is that something that you can incorporate into TMS?
Yes, so the image that I shared with you, I picked that one specifically because it had the mounting image. So in our preparation process, we have mount assessment sheets. And when we go through our mock-up process with our designers and curators and things, we take notes about how they want the mounts to be. And then when we've completed those mounts, we go back and we integrate notes of how they're loaded. Increasingly, I mean, that one was a drawing, that's kind of old school. Now we're taking pictures because it's just easier and faster. So we'll have images that show how the mounts work. And in the before times, when we had more people and more time, we were actually scanning all of those images into the system, and then gradually they were being uploaded by our wonderful Kay into the system. So you can actually see where those are. We also keep hard copies of all of those notes as well, so we can go back and reference them. In fact, some of the projects that we work on are, over 200 mounts per gallery, and you've made something so long ago that you don't even remember how it works yourself, and you have to go back and reference your own notes to see how to load an object. So,
Kim, we have a couple of questions from our online audience. One is, what are some future-proofing strategies you employed in your numbering system for the bins?
what was that, future-proofing?
Future-proofing, yes.
Well,
I guess as they go out and come back in.
The biggest thing I did was give each curatorial department a number of 100, or a range of 100. So I think the most bins that a department has is the American department right now, and it's got maybe 37 or something bins. So hopefully I'll be retired before that becomes an issue.
Hey, Kim. Sorry. Your old pal, Steve. I haven't seen that space in 8 years, and it's incredible. It was so disorganized, and back then it felt like we were doing good, but this is incredible.
Steve and I made those shelves together, so yeah. Thank you.
I just wanted to know how long you've been working on the project from now till the beginning of then.
Gosh. I don't know. It's been several years. I started doing it in the before times, before pandemic, so it's been going on at least that long. But as I said, it's had a few evolutions in, this bin system and the organization probably started a little bit before 2020. So I would say, 6 years maybe.
Is there anything that you would do differently, but you're just too far along in the process now?
Isn't that always the case? Honestly, not much at this point. As I said, sort of my final stuff, I'm always waiting for them to take the space away from us. So I'm just trying to get it as much done as possible so that when that day comes, we can just pick up all our bins, like load them on a flatbed, and off we move to whoever's office, decided to take that space. But I don't have anything overtly that I'm like, oh, I really should have done that differently. I think the biggest thing is that some of the really earlier bins are probably more spread out and not as, they don't have the layers that I established later on, so I might go back and refine some of those earlier bins just to increase their capacity, but I haven't really come across anything yet.
Hi, I was just curious about the overall reusability of the mounts. Like, what percentage of the time are you able to use your awesome system to find something you need?
I definitely find that some mounts get reused a lot because those are either very popular objects that get loaned a lot, or they're some of the stars of our collection and they're just included in exhibits all the time if they're not on permanent display. But probably more than you would think. Sometimes when we're really in crunch time, we'll have stipulations for curators when they're given permission to have an exhibition or make a change in a gallery that they're required to use something that already has a mount because we don't have the time to make them. So that happens quite a bit. We do find that some get outdated over time, and when we pull it, we're like, ooh. And so we'll say, we're going to go ahead and make a new one for that. But we do use them quite often. I'm not sure of a percentage, but it does seem to make the process worth it anyways.
I really like the reuse of the gallery space that you guys use for storage. Was there any prep you guys had to do to the walls and tiles before you guys could move in to preserve that space?
The floor is kind of, the middle part of the floor is covered because there is a ramp there, because there was stairs to get up to the back space. And our shelving basically comes almost right to that. So the remaining floor is covered. We didn't do any prep otherwise. I do try and keep things off the walls directly. Anything that is contacting, I'll put something between just to protect that space. But no, we didn't have to do much.
Just one more question we have time for.
Thanks. Two sort of related questions to each other. Do you actually physically ID the mount itself, like with a painted accession number and ID number? And if you do not, how are you keeping the hang tags associated with them if they're deployed again? Because that's our bête noire.
Sometimes we will physically just write with a Sharpie on the mount if you can. We also have punches, so occasionally if we have extra time, we'll punch a number into it or something, but generally it's just being meticulous about tracking things, so everything is tagged at all the time that it's not being used, and when they come off view or come back from loan, I give them new tags and then put them away. So it's just diligence at this point.
Thank you.